The morning rush at Central Station buzzed with its usual chaos. Commuters hurried past each other, clutching coffee cups and checking phones. Among them walked a woman who seemed perfectly ordinary. Sarah Martinez wore faded jeans, white sneakers, and a simple gray hoodie. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. Nothing about her suggested she was anything more than another person trying to catch the 8:15 train. She carried a worn canvas bag over her shoulder and moved through the crowd like water flowing around stones. Her eyes, however, told a different story. They moved constantly, scanning faces, watching body language, noting exits and gathering points. But, to anyone glancing her way, she appeared to be just another commuter lost in thought. Sarah had been working undercover for 3 years. Today marked her longest assignment yet. For 6 months, she had been living in the Riverside neighborhood, posing as a freelance graphic designer. Her apartment was small but carefully arranged to support her cover story. Art supplies sat on a desk by the window. Design magazines were scattered on the coffee table. Even her laptop contained actual design work she had taught herself to create. The neighborhood had been experiencing a surge in drug activity. Young people were overdosing at alarming rates. The substances being sold were more dangerous than anything seen before. Traditional police methods had failed to identify the source. Too many uniformed officers were known in the area. Too many informants had been compromised. The operation needed someone completely fresh. Sarah's supervisor, Lieutenant Rodriguez, had chosen her carefully. She had grown up in a similar neighborhood 3 states away. She understood the culture, the language, the unspoken rules. More importantly, she had the patience for the slow burn of undercover work. Some officers wanted quick results. Sarah understood that trust took time to build. Her first weeks in Riverside had been carefully planned. She frequented the local coffee shop, always ordering the same drink at the same time. She shopped at the corner market, exchanging small talk with the owner about the weather. She took evening walks, establishing a routine that neighbors would notice and remember. The breakthrough had come through Maria Santos, a 19-year-old single mother who lived in the apartment below. Maria worked 2 jobs to support her infant daughter. She was exhausted, stressed, and struggling to make ends meet. When Sarah offered to babysit occasionally, Maria was grateful for the help. Through Maria, Sarah learned about the social networks in the building. She discovered who could be trusted and who should be avoided. She heard whispered conversations about easy money and dangerous people. Most importantly, she gained access to the informal communication system that existed among the residents. The drug operation was more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The people running it had studied law enforcement tactics. They knew how to spot undercover officers. They used code words that changed weekly. They moved their operations frequently, never staying in one location long enough to establish patterns that police could track. Sarah's landlord was a man named Tommy Chin. He owned 3 buildings in the neighborhood and seemed to know everyone. Tommy was friendly but cautious. He collected rent in cash, asked few questions, and minded his own business. Sarah sensed he knew more about the area's problems than he let on, but she also understood why he stayed quiet. The first real lead came during a conversation with Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years. She sat on her stoop every afternoon, watching the street with sharp eyes. Mrs. Rodriguez had seen the changes in her community. She remembered when children could play outside safely, when families knew each other, when problems were solved through conversation rather than violence. These new people, she told Sarah one sunny Tuesday. They look young, but their eyes are old. They dress nice, drive nice cars, but they bring poison to our children. Mrs. Rodriguez described seeing well-dressed young people meeting briefly with local teenagers. The meetings always happened in different locations. Sometimes behind the laundromat, sometimes in the parking lot of the closed factory, sometimes in the small park where children used to play. Sarah began documenting these observations in coded messages she sent to Lieutenant Rodriguez. She used a system they had developed during training. Her messages looked like ordinary texts to a friend named Jessica, but they contain specific information about times, locations, and descriptions of suspects. The challenge was getting closer to the actual operation without raising suspicion. Sarah needed to find a way to be in the right place at the right time. She needed to witness transactions, identify key players, and gather evidence that would hold up in court. But any mistake could expose her identity and destroy months of work. Her opportunity came through an unexpected source. Carlos Mendez lived in the apartment next to Maria. He was 22 years old and worked nights at a warehouse. Carlos was polite but distant, always seeming to have more money than his job should provide. His clothes were expensive, his phone was the latest model, and he drove a car that cost more than most people in the building earned in a year. Sarah had noticed Carlos's schedule. He left for work at 10 p.m. and returned around 7 a.m. But, on certain nights, he didn't go to the warehouse. Instead, he would leave around midnight and return just before dawn. On those mornings, he seemed nervous, constantly checking his phone and looking over his shoulder. Maria mentioned that Carlos had been trying to date her for months. He offered to pay for things she couldn't afford, like new clothes for her daughter or dinner at expensive restaurants. Maria was tempted by his generosity but worried about where his money came from. "My mama didn't raise me to ask questions I don't want answers to," Maria told Sarah. "But Carlos makes me nervous. He's too eager to spend money on people he barely knows." Sarah realized that Carlos might be her way into the operation. But she needed to approach the situation carefully. If Carlos was involved in drug trafficking, he would be paranoid about new people. If he wasn't involved, her interest in him might seem suspicious. She began a subtle campaign to become part of Carlos's awareness. When they passed in the hallway, she offered friendly greetings. When she saw him struggling with groceries, she offered to help. When his car wouldn't start one morning, she offered him a ride to the bus stop. Carlos was initially suspicious of her attention. He asked casual questions about where she came from, what kind of work she did, how long she planned to stay in the neighborhood. Sarah answered with the carefully crafted details of her cover story. She showed him examples of her design work, complained about difficult clients, and expressed uncertainty about her future plans. Slowly, Carlos began to relax around her. He started lingering in conversations, asking about her weekend plans, mentioning movies he wanted to see. Sarah recognized the signs of romantic interest and knew she could use them to her advantage, but she also understood the ethical complications this created. The rules about undercover relationships were clear. Officers could not engage in romantic or sexual relationships to gather information. Such relationships violated both departmental policy and basic human decency. But Sarah could accept Carlos's attention without reciprocating it inappropriately. She began accepting his invitations to casual social activities. Coffee at the local shop, lunch at the taco truck, walks through the neighborhood in the evening. During these interactions, she learned more about Carlos's life, his friends, and his habits. Carlos had grown up in the neighborhood but had dreams of leaving. He talked about wanting to buy a house in the suburbs, about taking care of his mother, about starting a family someday. He seemed genuinely caring but also deeply conflicted about something he wouldn't discuss. During their fourth coffee meeting, Carlos received a text message that changed his entire demeanor. His relaxed posture became tense. His easy smile disappeared. He checked the time repeatedly and seemed unable to concentrate on their conversation. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, standing abruptly. "Something came up at work. I need to go." But it was 2 in the afternoon. Carlos's shift at the warehouse didn't start until 10 p.m. Sarah watched through the coffee shop window as he hurried down the street, constantly checking his phone. He didn't head toward the bus stop that would take him to the warehouse. Instead, he walked toward the industrial area where several abandoned buildings provided perfect cover for illegal activities. Sarah waited 10 minutes before following his route. She maintained her cover by stopping at various shops along the way, but she kept moving in the direction Carlos had gone. She needed to see where he was going without being seen herself. The industrial area had once been the heart of the neighborhood's economy. 3 factories had employed hundreds of local residents. But economic changes had closed the businesses and left behind empty buildings with broken windows and weeds growing through cracked parking lots. Sarah found a position behind a rusted dumpster where she could observe the largest abandoned building. Her patience was rewarded when she saw Carlos emerge from a side entrance. He was followed by 2 people she didn't recognize, a woman in her 30s wearing designer clothes and a man about Carlos's age with expensive jewelry and a confident swagger. The 3 of them talked for several minutes. Sarah couldn't hear their conversation, but their body language suggested it was serious business. The woman handed Carlos a small package. The man showed Carlos something on his phone. Carlos nodded repeatedly and appeared to be asking questions. After about 15 minutes, the meeting ended. The woman and man walked to a black SUV parked behind the building. Carlos waited until they drove away before heading back toward the residential area. Sarah noted the SUV's license plate and the time of the meeting. That evening, Sarah sent a coded message to Lieutenant Rodriguez. Jessica's friend introduced her to some interesting people today. New business opportunities in the art supply industry. We'll keep you updated on developments. The message would tell Rodriguez that she had witnessed a meeting between her target and unknown suspects. New intelligence was developing, and surveillance should continue. Sarah spent the rest of the evening analyzing what she had observed. The meeting's location, timing, and participants all suggested this was part of the drug operation she was investigating. Carlos appeared to be a mid-level participant, receiving instructions or supplies from higher-ranking members of the organization. But questions remained. What was in the package the woman had given Carlos? What had they shown him on the phone? Were they planning something immediate, or was this part of a longer-term strategy? More importantly, how could Sarah get closer to the operation without exposing herself? Carlos trusted her enough to socialize casually, but drug traffickers didn't invite outsiders to business meetings. She needed to find another angle of approach. The answer might lie with Maria. If Carlos was trying to impress her with his wealth, he might eventually reveal more about his activities. Sarah could encourage Maria to ask questions without making her a target for the trafficker's suspicion. But using Maria this way would put an innocent person at risk. If the drug dealers discovered that Maria was gathering information, they might hurt her or her daughter. Sarah would need to be extremely careful about how she proceeded. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah reflected on the challenges of undercover work. Every relationship was complicated by deception. Every friendship was tainted by hidden motives. Every conversation required careful calculation to maintain her cover while gathering intelligence. But she also thought about the young people who had overdosed in recent months. She remembered the grieving families she had seen at the community meetings about drug violence. She recalled the fear in children's eyes when they talked about what they had witnessed in their neighborhood. These memories reminded her why the work mattered. Someone was poisoning her community with dangerous drugs. Someone was profiting from the suffering of vulnerable people. Someone needed to be stopped. Sarah fell asleep planning her next moves. She would continue building trust with Carlos while looking for opportunities to gather more intelligence. She would support Maria while protecting her from unnecessary risks. She would maintain her cover while working toward the moment when she could finally reveal her true purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. The investigation was entering a crucial phase, and Sarah knew that her decisions in the coming weeks would determine its ultimate success or failure. 3 weeks after witnessing the meeting at the abandoned factory, Sarah had established herself as a regular part of Carlos's social circle. Their friendship had deepened through shared meals, movie nights, and long conversations about life, dreams, and the challenges of living in their neighborhood. Sarah walked a careful line, showing enough interest to maintain Carlos's trust while avoiding romantic entanglements that would complicate her mission. Carlos had introduced her to his friend Miguel, a 24-year-old who claimed to work in auto repair but always seemed to have clean hands and expensive clothes. Miguel was charming and funny, but Sarah noticed how his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings during conversations. He had the hyper-awareness of someone accustomed to danger. The three of them had started meeting regularly at Rosa's Kitchen, a small family restaurant where the owner knew everyone by name. During these gatherings, Sarah learned that Carlos and Miguel had grown up together, attending the same elementary school and playing on the same youth basketball team. Their friendship appeared genuine, but Sarah sensed an underlying tension in their interactions. Miguel often made comments about money that seemed designed to impress. He talked about investment opportunities, business ventures, and financial strategies that seemed far beyond what someone his age should know. When Sarah asked questions about these topics, he would deflect with jokes or change the subject entirely. Money talks, but wealth whispers, Miguel said during one dinner. Smart people know how to make dollars without making noise. Carlos would nod along with these statements, but Sarah noticed he seemed uncomfortable with Miguel's bragging. Sometimes Carlos would try to steer conversations towards safer topics like sports or neighborhood gossip. But Miguel always found ways to circle back to discussions of easy money and quick opportunities. Sarah's training had taught her to recognize these patterns. Drug organizations often recruited through existing friendships. They looked for people who were struggling financially but wanted to maintain their self-respect. They offered opportunities that seemed legitimate on the surface but gradually drew recruits deeper into illegal activities. Carlos fit the profile perfectly. He worked hard at a legitimate job but didn't earn enough to support the lifestyle he wanted. He had family responsibilities, including helping his elderly mother with medical bills. He was intelligent and reliable, qualities that made him valuable to criminal organizations seeking trustworthy associates. Maria had started dating Carlos officially, which gave Sarah additional insight into his behavior patterns. Maria mentioned that Carlos had been generous with money lately, paying for dinners she couldn't afford and buying toys for her daughter. But she also noticed that he seemed stressed about something he wouldn't discuss. He gets text messages at all hours, Maria told Sarah. Sometimes he has to leave in the middle of the night. He says it's work emergencies, but what kind of emergency happens at a warehouse? Sarah encouraged Maria to trust her instincts while being careful not to push too hard for information. She didn't want Maria to become suspicious of her interest in Carlos's activities. But she also wanted to protect Maria from getting involved in something dangerous. The breakthrough came during a community meeting about neighborhood safety. The meeting was held at the local community center, and about 30 residents attended. The discussion focused on recent increases in drug activity and what could be done to protect local children. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke passionately about the changes she had witnessed. "These dealers are smart," she said. "They don't look like criminals. They dress like successful young people. They drive nice cars. They treat people with respect until you cross them." Police Detective Williams attended the meeting to answer questions and provide updates on ongoing investigations. He was careful not to reveal specific details, but he acknowledged that law enforcement was aware of the problems and working actively to address them. "We know there's a sophisticated operation working in this area," Detective Williams said. "These aren't street corner dealers selling small amounts. This is organized crime with connections beyond our neighborhood." After the meeting, Sarah noticed Carlos and Miguel talking quietly in the parking lot. Their conversation appeared intense, with both men gesturing animatedly. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe them without being obvious about her interest. Carlos seemed to be expressing concerns about something. He kept shaking his head and pointing toward the community center where the meeting had been held. Miguel appeared to be trying to reassure him, placing a hand on his shoulder and speaking in calm tones. Their conversation was interrupted when a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. Sarah recognized it as the same vehicle she had seen at the abandoned factory. The woman who had given Carlos the package stepped out of the driver's seat. She was well-dressed and professionally groomed, looking more like a businesswoman than a criminal. The woman walked directly to Carlos and Miguel. Her approach was friendly but authoritative. She spoke to them for about 5 minutes, during which both men listened attentively and nodded frequently. She handed Carlos a business card and shook hands with both men before returning to her SUV. Sarah memorized the SUV's license plate and noted the time and location of the encounter. She also tried to read the woman's body language and facial expressions. The woman projected confidence and control, suggesting she held a position of authority within the organization. After the woman left, Carlos and Miguel continued talking for a few more minutes before separating. Carlos walked toward his apartment building while Miguel headed in the opposite direction. Sarah waited until both men were out of sight before heading home herself. That evening, Sarah sent another coded message to Lieutenant Rodriguez. Jessica met some potential new clients today. Business networking seems promising. Art supply industry has more layers than expected. The message would inform Rodriguez that she had observed another meeting between known suspects and an unknown authority figure. The investigation was revealing a more complex organizational structure than initially suspected. Over the following week, Sarah noticed changes in Carlos's behavior. He seemed more nervous than usual, constantly checking his phone and looking over his shoulder. He started asking Maria about her work schedule and whether she had noticed any strangers in the neighborhood. Carlos asked me 3 times if anyone has been asking questions about him, Maria told Sarah. I don't know what he's worried about, but something has him spooked. Sarah realized that the community meeting had made the drug organization more cautious. They were probably increasing security measures and watching for signs of law enforcement activity. This made her job more dangerous but also suggested that pressure from the investigation was having an effect. She decided to test Carlos's trust by expressing her own concerns about neighborhood safety. During their next coffee meeting, she mentioned feeling worried about recent crime reports and asked if he had noticed anything suspicious. You know how it is, Carlos said carefully. People see things, but they don't want to get involved. Sometimes it's better to mind your own business. But don't you think we should look out for each other? Sarah asked. Especially people like Maria who have children to protect? Carlos's expression became serious. Maria is good people. She deserves better than this neighborhood. But getting involved in other people's problems can be dangerous. Sarah sensed that Carlos wanted to say more but was holding back. She decided to push slightly further without seeming too interested. Have you ever been approached by anyone offering easy money? She asked. I heard that happens sometimes in neighborhoods like this. Carlos stiffened. Why would you ask something like that? I just want to understand what we're dealing with, Sarah said. If someone approached me, I'd want to know what to expect. Carlos studied her face for a long moment before responding. Sarah, you seem like a smart person. Smart people know when to ask questions and when to stay quiet. If someone offers you something that seems too good to be true, walk away. Don't ask questions. Don't try to understand. Just walk away. The warning was clear, and Sarah recognized it as both advice and a veiled threat. Carlos was trying to protect her while also establishing boundaries around topics they couldn't discuss. This confirmed her suspicion that he was involved in the drug operation but suggested he might not be entirely comfortable with his role. 2 days later, Sarah witnessed another significant development. She was returning from grocery shopping when she saw Miguel arguing with someone in the parking lot behind her apartment building. The other person was the young man with expensive jewelry she had seen at the factory meeting. Their argument was heated but conducted in low voices. Sarah couldn't hear specific words, but their body language indicated serious disagreement. Miguel kept shaking his head and pointing toward the street. The other man appeared to be making demands or giving orders. The confrontation ended when Miguel threw his hands up in apparent frustration and walked away. The other man watched him leave before making a phone call. Sarah noted the time and took a mental photograph of the scene for her next report to Lieutenant Rodriguez. That weekend, Carlos invited Sarah and Maria to a barbecue at his cousin's house in another neighborhood. Sarah saw this as an opportunity to observe Carlos in a different social setting and possibly meet other people connected to his activities. The barbecue was a family gathering with about 20 people ranging from children to elderly relatives. Carlos seemed more relaxed than Sarah had seen him in weeks. He played with the children, helped with cooking, and engaged in easy conversation with family members. But Sarah noticed that Carlos received several phone calls during the afternoon. Each time his phone rang, his demeanor would change. He would step away from the group, speak quietly for a few minutes, and return looking stressed. After the third call, he told Maria they needed to leave early. Work emergency, he explained, but Maria looked skeptical. During the drive back to their neighborhood, Carlos was unusually quiet. He kept checking his rearview mirror and seemed to be taking an indirect route home. Sarah pretended to be tired and closed her eyes, but she remained alert to their surroundings. Carlos dropped Maria and her daughter at their apartment before walking Sarah to her door. As they stood in the hallway, he seemed to be struggling with something he wanted to say. "Sarah," he finally said, "I want you to know that I think you're a good person. You've been a real friend to Maria, and you've been kind to me. That means something." "You're a good person too, Carlos," Sarah replied. He shook his head. "Sometimes good people make choices that aren't so good. Sometimes circumstances force you to do things you never thought you'd do." Sarah recognized this as a moment when Carlos might reveal important information. She waited silently, giving him space to continue. "If something happens," Carlos said, "if things change around here, I want you to know it's nothing personal. And I want you to be careful. Pay attention to what's going on around you." Before Sarah could respond, Carlos's phone buzzed with a text message. His face went pale as he read it. "I have to go," he said, already backing toward the stairs. "Remember what I said about being careful." Sarah watched him leave, her mind racing with possibilities. Carlos's warning suggested that something significant was about to happen. The drug organization might be planning a major operation, or they might have discovered that law enforcement was investigating them. Either way, Sarah knew she needed to accelerate her intelligence gathering. Time was running out to identify key players and gather evidence before the organization either struck or disappeared. She spent that night reviewing everything she had observed over the past 6 months. The pattern of meetings, the hierarchy she had glimpsed, the increasing tension among the participants, all of it pointed toward a critical moment approaching. Sarah sent an urgent coded message to Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Jessica's art project is reaching completion phase. Client timeline has accelerated. May need to finalize arrangements soon." The message would alert Rodriguez that the investigation had reached a crucial stage. Sarah's cover was still intact, but developments in the criminal organization suggested that action might be required sooner than planned. As she prepared for what might be her last week undercover, Sarah thought about all the people whose lives had become entangled with her mission. Maria and her daughter, who deserved to live in a safe neighborhood. Carlos, who had been drawn into criminal activity despite his better instincts. Mrs. Rodriguez and the other longtime residents who had watched their community change for the worse. The success of her investigation could protect all of these people from the harm caused by the drug trafficking operation. But it would also end the relationships she had built during her months undercover. Carlos would feel betrayed when he learned her true identity. Maria would question whether their friendship had been genuine. These were the costs of undercover work that training couldn't fully prepare officers to handle. Sarah had known intellectually that deception was necessary for her mission. But living with the daily reality of lying to people who trusted her created an emotional burden she hadn't anticipated. Still, as she reviewed the evidence she had gathered, Sarah felt confident that the investigation was close to achieving its goals. The drug organization was sophisticated and dangerous, but it wasn't invulnerable. With the right coordination between her intelligence and tactical operations, law enforcement could disrupt the network and arrest its key members. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the situation continued to evolve. Sarah would need to maintain her cover while positioning herself to gather final pieces of evidence. She would need to protect the innocent people in her life while preparing for the moment when her true identity would finally be revealed. The urgent phone call came at 3 in the morning. Sarah woke to the sound of her encrypted phone buzzing against the nightstand. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice was tense when she answered. "We need to move the timeline up," he said without preamble. "Intelligence suggests a major shipment is arriving this week. This might be our only chance to catch the entire organization in action." Sarah sat up, instantly alert. What's the situation? Federal task force intercepted communications about a delivery scheduled for Thursday night. The quantity suggests this is their biggest operation yet. We need you to find out the exact location and timing. Sarah checked her clock. It was Monday morning. She had 3 days to gather intelligence that could make or break the entire investigation. Understood, she said. I'll make contact today. Be careful, Rodriguez warned. If they're planning something this big, security will be tight. Any suspicious behavior could compromise your cover. After ending the call, Sarah lay awake planning her approach. Carlos had been increasingly nervous about something, and his warning about being careful suggested he knew significant events were approaching. She needed to find a way to learn about the shipment without raising his suspicions. The opportunity came sooner than expected. That afternoon, Maria knocked on Sarah's door with tears in her eyes. Carlos wants me to take Isabella and visit my sister in Phoenix this weekend, Maria said. He bought us plane tickets without asking me first. When I asked why, he said he just wanted us to have a vacation. Sarah invited Maria inside and made coffee while listening to her concerns. He's been acting so strange lately, Maria continued. Secretive phone calls, leaving at odd hours, giving me money I know he can't afford. I'm starting to think he's involved in something dangerous. This was the opening Sarah had been hoping for, but she needed to handle it carefully. Maria's safety was paramount, and Sarah couldn't encourage her to take unnecessary risks. What does your instinct tell you? Sarah asked. My instinct says to take Isabella and go to Phoenix like he wants. But my heart says I should try to help him if he's in trouble. Sarah chose her words carefully. Sometimes the best way to help someone is to stay safe yourself. If Carlos is dealing with dangerous people, you and Isabella being somewhere safe might actually help him focus on handling his problems. Maria nodded slowly. You're probably right. But I'm scared about what might happen to him while we're gone. Maybe you could find a way to check on him without putting yourself at risk, Sarah suggested. Does he have any family or close friends who could keep an eye on him? Miguel is his closest friend, but lately I think Miguel might be part of the problem. Carlos gets more stressed after spending time with him. That evening, Sarah engineered a casual encounter with Carlos. She was returning from a walk when he arrived home from work. He looked exhausted and distracted. How are you doing? She asked. You seem like you've had a lot on your mind lately. Carlos glanced around nervously before responding. Just work stuff. You know how it is. Maria mentioned you got her tickets to visit her sister. That's really thoughtful. Carlos's expression became guarded. I just thought she could use a break from the neighborhood. Sometimes it's good to get away from familiar places. Sarah recognized this as another subtle warning. Carlos was trying to ensure Maria's safety without explaining why she might be in danger. Will you be okay here by yourself? Sarah asked. I'll be fine. I have some things to take care of, but nothing I can't handle. If you need anything while she's gone, just let me know. I'm a good listener if you ever want to talk. Carlos studied her face for a long moment. Sarah, you're a good friend. But some things are better left alone. You should probably visit some friends this weekend too. Maybe get out of town for a few days. The suggestion was another warning, confirming that something significant was planned for the weekend. Sarah needed to find out more specific details. I might visit my cousin in Albany, she said, testing whether Carlos would provide more information. But I was thinking of leaving Sunday instead of Friday. Is there any reason I should leave earlier? Carlos's hesitation told her everything she needed to know. Whatever was planned, it was scheduled for sometime before Sunday. Friday would be better, he said finally. Trust me on that. Tuesday brought more urgency to the situation. Sarah observed increased activity around the abandoned factory where she had first witnessed Carlos meeting with the organization's leadership. Several unfamiliar vehicles had been parked in the area, and she noticed people conducting what appeared to be security sweeps of the building. Sarah positioned herself at different observation points throughout the day, documenting license plates and photographing individuals when possible. The level of preparation suggested that the upcoming operation was indeed significant. That afternoon, Miguel approached her while she was checking her mailbox. "Hey, Sarah," he said, trying to sound casual. "Carlos mentioned you might be leaving town this weekend." "I'm thinking about it," she replied carefully. "Good idea. Sometimes it's smart to take a break from routine, you know? Clear your head, see new places." Miguel's comment felt like a veiled threat disguised as friendly advice. Sarah realized that her presence in the neighborhood had been discussed among the organization's members. They wanted her gone during their operation. "Any particular reason I should leave?" she asked, maintaining an innocent tone. Miguel shrugged. "No particular reason. Just sometimes change is good. You've been working pretty hard on your design projects. A vacation might inspire new ideas." After Miguel left, Sarah sent an encrypted message to Lieutenant Rodriguez, subject strongly encouraging departure before weekend. Major activity confirmed for Friday/Saturday timeframe. Wednesday morning brought a development that changed everything. Sarah was awakened by shouting in the hallway. She looked out her peephole to see Carlos arguing with two men she didn't recognize. Both men wore expensive suits and had the bearing of people accustomed to intimidating others. "You don't understand," Carlos was saying. "She's not involved. She doesn't know anything." "Everyone is a potential risk," one of the men replied coldly. "The boss doesn't like loose ends. I've been handling this for months without any problems. You need to trust me to manage my own territory. Your territory is about to become very valuable. We can't afford any complications from civilians who ask too many questions." Sarah realized they were talking about her. Somehow, her interest in Carlos and the neighborhood had been noticed. The organization was considering her a security threat. The argument continued for several more minutes before the two men left. Carlos remained in the hallway, running his hands through his hair and looking deeply troubled. Sarah waited until she was sure the men were gone before opening her door. "Carlos? Is everything okay?" He spun around, startled. "Sarah! I didn't know you were awake. I heard voices. It sounded like you were upset about something." Carlos looked down the hallway to ensure they were alone before stepping closer to her door. "Listen carefully," he said in a low voice. "You need to leave tonight. Not tomorrow, not this weekend. Tonight." "What's happening?" "I can't explain everything, but some people think you've been asking too many questions. They're worried you might cause problems for their business." Sarah's heart raced. Her cover was compromised, but she needed to maintain it long enough to gather final intelligence about the operation. "I don't understand," she said. "What business? What questions? The less you know, the safer you'll be. Just pack whatever you need and go stay with friends somewhere far from here. Don't come back until next week." "Carlos, you're scaring me. If something dangerous is happening, shouldn't we call the police?" Carlos laughed bitterly. "The police can't help with this. These people are too smart and too well connected. The only way to stay safe is to stay away." Sarah made a decision that would either complete her mission or destroy it entirely. "I can't leave," she said. "Maria and Isabella are my friends. You're my friend. If something bad is going to happen, I want to help." Carlos stared at her in amazement. "Help? Sarah, these aren't people you help or fight against. These are people you avoid and hope they forget you exist. Then, why are you involved with them?" The question hung in the air between them. Carlos seemed to be wrestling with how much to reveal. "Because sometimes you don't have choices," he said finally. "Sometimes your family needs medical treatment you can't afford. Sometimes your legitimate job doesn't pay enough to survive. Sometimes you tell yourself you'll just do one small favor, and before you know it, you're in too deep to get out. Sarah recognized this as Carlos's confession. He was admitting his involvement while also revealing his reluctance and vulnerability. "There has to be a way out," she said. "Maybe. But not this week. This week, everyone needs to stay quiet and stay safe. After Friday night, maybe things will be different." "What happens Friday night?" Carlos realized he had said too much. "I can't tell you that. I've already said more than I should. Carlos, I care about you and Maria. If you're in danger, I want to help. The best way to help is to leave. Go pack your things. I'll drive you to the bus station myself." Sarah knew this was her last chance to gather intelligence about the location and timing of the operation. She had to take a calculated risk. "If I'm going to leave everything behind, I need to understand why. I need to know what's so dangerous that I have to abandon my life here." Carlos struggled visibly with the decision. Finally, he seemed to reach a conclusion. "There's going to be a delivery Friday night. A big one. The people making the delivery don't like witnesses. They don't like complications. They solve problems permanently." "Where is this delivery happening?" "I can't tell you that." "Carlos, if these people are as dangerous as you say, shouldn't someone stop them?" "Who's going to stop them? The local police? These people have connections everywhere. They know which cops can be bought and which ones ask too many questions." Sarah realized Carlos was expressing a fundamental distrust of law enforcement. This was why community members often refused to cooperate with police investigations. They believed the system was too corrupt to protect them. "What if there were police officers who couldn't be bought?" she asked. "What if there were people working to protect neighborhoods like this?" Carlos looked at her with surprise. "You really believe that's possible?" "I have to believe it's possible. Otherwise, what hope do any of us have?" Carlos studied her face for a long moment. Sarah could see him weighing whether to trust her with more information. "The delivery is happening at the old factory on Industrial Road," he said quietly. "Friday night around midnight. A truck is bringing in enough product to supply the entire region for months." Sarah felt a surge of triumph mixed with fear. She had the intelligence Rodriguez needed, but she had also revealed more about herself than was safe. "Thank you for trusting me," she said. "I'm trusting you with my life," Carlos replied. "If the wrong people find out I told you this, they'll kill me and, probably Maria too. No one will find out from me. You need to leave tonight. Promise me you'll leave tonight." "I promise," Sarah said, though she knew it was a lie she would have to answer for later. After Carlos left, Sarah immediately called Lieutenant Rodriguez with the intelligence about the delivery. The location, timing, and scale of the operation would allow law enforcement to plan an effective interdiction. But Sarah also knew that Carlos would expect her to be gone in the morning. When he discovered she was still in the building, he would realize she had deceived him. That realization would destroy any remaining trust between them and might even put him in danger with his criminal associates. Sarah had achieved her mission objective, but at the cost of betraying someone who had genuinely tried to protect her. The moral complexity of undercover work had never felt more personal. As she prepared for what would likely be her last night undercover, Sarah reflected on the relationships she had formed and the lives she had touched during her months in the neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring the culmination of her investigation, but it would also bring the end of connections that had come to matter more than she had expected. The operation was approaching its climax, and Sarah would soon learn whether the evidence she had gathered would be enough to dismantle the criminal organization that had poisoned her temporary community. But she would also have to face the personal consequences of the deceptions that had made her success possible. Friday morning arrived with the weight of inevitable revelation. Sarah had spent a sleepless night preparing for the operation that would end her 6-month undercover assignment. Lieutenant Rodriguez had confirmed that the task force was ready to intercept the delivery at the abandoned factory. Sarah's role was to maintain her cover until the arrests were made, then safely extract herself from the neighborhood. But first, she had to face Carlos.
At 7 a.m., Carlos knocked on her door.
When Sarah answered, his face showed a mixture of confusion and growing suspicion.
"You're still here," he said flatly. "Yes, I'm still here. I told you to leave last night."
I explained why it was important. Sarah had rehearsed this conversation, but facing Carlos in person made the words more difficult to say.
"I couldn't leave without making sure you and Maria would be safe."
Carlos stepped into her apartment and closed the door behind him. His demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the nervous, conflicted young man she had come to know. In his place stood someone harder, more calculating.
"Who are you?" he asked. Sarah's cover story crumbled under the direct question.
She could see in Carlos's eyes that he had already reached his own conclusions. "I'm someone who cares about this neighborhood," she said truthfully.
"That's not an answer. Who do you work for?"
The moment Sarah had trained for had arrived. She reached slowly into her back pocket and withdrew her badge and identification.
"Detective Sarah Martinez, Metro Police Department. I'm a narcotics investigator working undercover."
Carlos stared at the badge for a long moment before sitting heavily in her desk chair. He put his head in his hands and was silent for nearly a minute.
"How long have you known?" Sarah asked.
"I started suspecting last week when you asked too many specific questions. I became sure yesterday when those men mentioned someone asking about the operation."
"There aren't many new people in this building who would have shown that kind of interest. Carlos, I want you to know that everything I said about caring about you and Maria was true. Getting to know you as a person wasn't part of my assignment. That happened despite my job, not because of it." Carlos looked up at her with bitter amusement. "You're telling me you became friends with me by accident while you were investigating me? I became friends with you because you're a good person who got involved in something bad."
"I investigated the organization you work for because they're poisoning kids in this neighborhood. Those kids chose to buy drugs."
"No one forced them."
"Those kids bought drugs that were deliberately made more dangerous to create stronger addictions. The people you work for are predators." Carlos stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where they had shared coffee and conversations over the past months.
"So what happens now?" he asked. "You arrest me?" "That depends on several things. How deeply involved are you? Are you willing to cooperate with the investigation? Do you want to help us protect other people from getting pulled into this organization? You want me to be a snitch. I want you to be a witness. There's a difference." Carlos turned back to her. "What difference?"
"A snitch betrays people to save himself. A witness tells the truth to protect others."
"You've already been protecting people, Carlos. You tried to get Maria out of town. You warned me to leave. You don't want innocent people to get hurt. But I do want to save myself. That's human nature. There's nothing wrong with wanting to survive."
Carlos was quiet again, processing the situation and his options. Sarah gave him time to think while also listening for sounds from the hallway that might indicate other members of the organization were approaching.
"If I cooperate," Carlos finally said, "what kind of protection can you offer?"
"That depends on how much help you can provide. If your testimony helps us arrest the leadership of this organization, we can arrange relocation assistance, financial support while you find legitimate work, and witness protection if necessary."
"And if I don't cooperate?"
"Then, you'll likely be arrested tonight along with everyone else involved in the delivery operation. Depending on your specific role and criminal history, you could face several years in prison."
Carlos nodded slowly. "You already know about the delivery. I know when and where it's happening.
But I don't know who all the participants are, how the organization is structured, or where they get their supplies from. That information could help us prevent future operations and protect other communities."
"You want me to betray people who trust me?"
"I want you to help me stop people who are destroying lives for profit. Some of those people might have treated you well personally, but their business model depends on addiction, violence, and fear." Carlos walked back to the desk chair and sat down again. Sarah could see him weighing his loyalty to his criminal associates against his desire to protect Maria and escape the life he had been drawn into. "The woman you've seen me with," he said slowly. "Her name is Diana Restrepo. She runs the operation for this part of the city. She answers to someone higher up, but I've never met that person." Sarah sat across from him and took out a notebook. "Tell me about Diana. How did you first meet her?" "Miguel introduced us about 8 months ago. He said she was looking for reliable people to help with deliveries. The pay was good, and it seemed low risk." "What was your role initially?" "I would receive packages and hold them until buyers came to pick them up. Simple storage, basically. I was told the packages contained electronics that were being sold without proper tax documentation." "When did you realize it was drugs?" "After about 2 months. The packages were too small and too valuable to be electronics. The buyers were obviously addicts." And Diana started talking about expanding the operation and bringing in stronger products. "How many people work for Diana? In this neighborhood?" "Maybe 15 or 20. But she has people in other areas too. The organization is bigger than what you see here." Sarah continued questioning Carlos for the next hour, gathering details about the criminal network's structure, methods, and key personnel. Carlos provided information reluctantly but thoroughly, seemingly relieved to finally share the burden of knowledge he had been carrying. At 9 a.m., Sarah's encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Target vehicles observed moving toward location. Operation begins at 2300 hours." "What was that?" Carlos asked. "Confirmation that tonight's operation is proceeding as planned. In about 14 hours, law enforcement will move to arrest everyone involved in the delivery." "Including me?" "Not necessarily. If you're willing to continue cooperating, we can arrange for you to be absent from the location when the arrests happen." Carlos considered this offer. "What would I have to do?" "Help us identify everyone who will be present tonight. Provide detailed information about how the delivery process works. And potentially testify in court against the organization's leadership." "Testifying in court means my face and name become public information. Even if Diana and her bosses go to prison, they have associates who would want revenge. Which is why witness protection exists. You and Maria could start over somewhere safe with new identities and financial support." "You're asking me to give up my entire life." "Carlos, what kind of life do you have now?" "You're constantly afraid. You can't be honest with people you care about. You're involved in activities that could send you to prison or get you killed. Is that really the life you want to keep?" Carlos was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the neighborhood he had grown up in. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out across his face. "If I do this," he finally said, "I want guarantees about Maria's safety. She doesn't know anything about the organization, but she could be targeted just for being associated with me. We can arrange protection for her too. The Witness Protection Program can cover family members and associates who might be at risk." "And you promise this will actually stop the organization? Not just arrest a few people while the operation continues under different leadership?" "I can't promise we'll eliminate drug trafficking entirely. But the intelligence you provide could help us identify suppliers, distributors, and money laundering operations connected to this network. That would significantly disrupt their ability to operate." Carlos stood up and walked to the window again. "How do I know I can trust you? You've been lying to me for 6 months. You're right that I've been deceptive about my identity and my purpose here. But everything I've told you about wanting to protect this community has been true. Everything I've said about caring about you and Maria as people has been true. How can you separate the truth from the lies when your job requires deception?" Sarah had struggled with this question throughout her undercover assignment. The answer she gave Carlos was as much for her own understanding as for his. The lies were about facts: who I am, where I come from, why I'm here. The truth was about values: wanting to help people, caring about justice, believing that communities deserve to be safe from predators. Carlos turned back to face her.
If I agree to cooperate, when does it start?
It starts now. We need to plan how to keep you away from tonight's delivery while making it look like a natural absence. We also need to discuss how to protect Maria and when to begin your relocation process.
And if I decide not to cooperate? Then, I walk out of this apartment and never contact you again.
You participate in tonight's delivery as planned, and whatever happens after that is between you and the justice system. Carlos looked around the small apartment where they had spent countless hours talking about dreams, fears, and the challenges of life in their neighborhood. Sarah realized he was saying goodbye to more than just a place, he was saying goodbye to the person he had been.
Okay, he said quietly. I'll do it. I'll cooperate.
Sarah felt a complex mixture of relief, satisfaction, and sadness. The investigation had achieved its primary objective, but at the cost of upending lives and relationships that had mattered to everyone involved.
Thank you, she said. I know this wasn't an easy decision. Don't thank me yet. Let's see if your promises about protection and justice actually come true.
Over the next several hours, Sarah coordinated with Lieutenant Rodriguez to arrange Carlos's cooperation and ensure Maria's safety. Carlos provided detailed information about the delivery operation, including the identities of key participants and the specific procedures that would be followed. That evening, as law enforcement officers prepared for the largest drug bust in the city's recent history, Carlos called Diana Restrepo to report that he had food poisoning and wouldn't be able to participate in the night's activities. Diana was annoyed but not suspicious, as Carlos had never missed an assignment before, and his call came early enough for her to arrange replacement personnel. At 11 p.m., Carlos and Maria were in a safe house across town, under protective surveillance. Sarah was in an observation vehicle 3 blocks from the abandoned factory, watching as federal agents and local police moved into position for the operation. At 11:47 p.m., a large truck arrived at the factory carrying what investigators estimated was over 50 kilograms of fentanyl and other synthetic drugs. Diana Restrepo was present to oversee the delivery, along with 12 other members of the criminal organization. The arrests were swift and coordinated. Within 20 minutes, law enforcement had taken 15 suspects into custody and seized drugs worth millions of dollars on the street. Diana Restrepo and her key lieutenants were charged with federal drug trafficking offenses that carried mandatory minimum sentences of 20 years in prison. Sarah's 6-month undercover investigation was over, but its impacts were just beginning. Carlos's cooperation led to additional arrests and the identification of supplier networks operating across multiple states. The evidence gathered through Sarah's work resulted in convictions that significantly disrupted drug trafficking in the region. 3 months later, Carlos and Maria were living in a small town in Oregon under new identities provided by the Witness Protection Program. Carlos had found work at a legitimate logistics company, and Maria was taking courses to become a certified nurse's aide. Their daughter was thriving in a community where children could play outside safely. Sarah returned to regular detective work, but she carried with her the memory of relationships formed and broken during her time undercover. She had learned that effective policing sometimes required personal sacrifices that went beyond physical danger or professional risk. The badge that revealed her true authority had ended one phase of her career and begun another. Sarah had protected a community from those who sought to exploit its vulnerabilities, but she had also discovered that justice often came at costs that couldn't be measured in arrests or convictions. The young woman who had appeared to be just another civilian in the neighborhood had proven to be exactly what the community needed, someone willing to stand between predators and their victims, regardless of the personal consequences. Her true authority came not from the badge she carried, but from her commitment to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As Sarah reviewed the case files months later, she reflected on the complexity of undercover work and the moral ambiguities inherent in fighting crime through deception. But she also remembered the faces of the young people who had overdosed before her investigation began, and she knew that the choices she had made, difficult as they were, had likely saved lives. The badge had revealed her authority, but her actions had defined her character. In a profession where the line between right and wrong was often blurred by necessity, Sarah had found a way to remain true to her fundamental purpose, serving and protecting the communities that depended on law enforcement to stand against those who would do them harm.